In the freezing twilight of late November 1942, the strategic paradigm of the Eastern Front was violently and irrevocably shattered as the Soviet Red Army executed Operation Uranus, a double-enveloping counteroffensive that trapped the German Sixth Army in the ruins of Stalingrad. For months, Adolf Hitler and the German Army High Command, the OKH, had focused their manic energy on the prestige-driven battle for the city on the Volga, convinced that Soviet reserves were entirely depleted and that a final, crowning victory was within reach. This obsession blinded them to the extreme vulnerability of the overextended, poorly equipped Romanian and Italian armies guarding the flanks of Army Group B. When the Soviet tank columns erupted from the northern and southern steppes on November 19, they easily shattered the flank defenses, linking up at Kalak on the Don just 4 days later and sealing over 250,000 Axis soldiers inside a frozen pocket. The encirclement presented General Chief of Staff Kurt Zeitzler and the field commanders with an immediate, existential crisis. The Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, was completely isolated, lacking sufficient rations, winter clothing, ammunition, and, most critically, fuel to sustain itself or execute an immediate breakout. At the same moment, hundreds of miles to the south, the elite divisions of Army Group A, under General Ewald von Kleist, lay deep within the rugged Caucasus Mountains, having captured the Maikop oil fields in August but failing to break through to the main oil prizes of Grozny and Baku. This dispersion of German military power, split between the Volga and the Caucasus, was the fatal flaw of the summer offensive, Case Blue. With the Sixth Army trapped, the entire southern wing of the German Wehrmacht faced complete encirclement and annihilation if the Red Army pushed west to capture Rostov-on-Don, the narrow geographical throat through which all supplies and retreat paths for the Caucasus forces flowed. The critical question that immediately arose in the corridors of the OKH was whether Germany should instantly abandon its dream of conquering Soviet oil, evacuate the Caucasus immediately, and redirect those powerful, battle-hardened panzer divisions north to form an overwhelming relief force that could smash through the Soviet ring and rescue the Sixth Army before the onset of the brutal winter. The theoretical execution of an immediate, full-scale evacuation of the Caucasus in late November 1942 was a logistical and operational challenge of staggering proportions. At the moment of the Stalingrad encirclement, Ewald von Kleist's Army Group A commanded the First Panzer Army and the 17th Army, comprising some of the most combat-effective, experienced armored and mountain divisions in the entire Wehrmacht. Among these were the Third Panzer Division, the 13th Panzer Division, and the elite Fifth SS Panzer Division Wikingâ, units that possessed the raw mobility and tactical punch that could theoretically shatter any Soviet defensive line. However, the physical reality of the Eastern Front during the Russian winter imposed severe, non-negotiable limitations on the speed of any such redeployment. The distance from the deep Caucasus positions near Ordzhonikidze and Alger to the proposed relief assembly areas near Kotelnikovo and Solsk was over 400 miles across barren, snow-swept steppes, with virtually no paved roads and a transport infrastructure that was primitive at best. Moving heavy armored divisions across these vast distances required a massive, coordinated rail effort, but the entire logistical network of the Southern Front was dependent on a single-track railway line running from the Caucasus through Rostov. This vital artery was already severely congested, plagued by coal shortages, mechanical breakdowns, and constant harassment by Soviet partisans and long-range air raids. If the First Panzer Army were to withdraw immediately on November 24, driving on their own tracks would cause catastrophic mechanical attrition, wearing out tank engines, shredding tracks on the frozen ground, and consuming immense quantities of precious synthetic fuel that was already in short supply across the entire theater. Consequently, any rapid redeployment would be a race against time, as every day of delay allowed the Red Army to strengthen its defensive ring around Stalingrad, dig in fresh anti-tank regiments, and prepare its own offensive operations designed to cut off the Rostov bottleneck and trap the entire Army Group A in the Caucasus, turning a strategic withdrawal into a catastrophic rout. A central question of this counterfactual scenario is whether the German allies, primarily the Romanian and Italian forces, could have maintained control over the Maikop oil fields and the surrounding Cuban region if the German heavy divisions of Army Group A had evacuated immediately. Maikop had been captured by the Wehrmacht on August 10, 1942, amid immense propaganda and high economic expectations from Adolf Hitler, who famously declared that if he did not secure the oil of Maikop and Grozny, he would be forced to end the war. However, the actual economic reality of Maikop was a profound, expensive failure. Before retreating, Soviet engineers and oil workers had executed a brilliant, thorough campaign of industrial sabotage, pouring quick-drying cement down the oil shafts, dynamiting the drilling rigs, destroying the local refineries, and dismantling the storage tanks. Despite Albert Spee's deployment of the specialized Technical Brigade mineral oil to restore production, the oil fields were barely producing a fraction of their pre-war capacity, serving as an economic mirage rather than a functional asset for the Axis war effort. If the German units had withdrawn in late November, the task of holding this barren, sabotaged territory would have fallen to the highly depleted, demoralized Romanian Second Mountain Division and other Allied infantry formations, who completely lacked the heavy artillery, armored reserves, and anti-tank capabilities required to resist a determined Soviet assault. The Soviet Transcaucasus Front, comprising the 9th, 37th, and 44th Armies, possessed an overwhelming numerical superiority in infantry and mountain warfare troops, and would have instantly detected the German withdrawal. Without the stiffening presence of German panzers and heavy infantry, the Romanian defences would have collapsed in a matter of days, allowing the Red Army to rapidly recapture Maikop and sweep across the Cuban steppe, proving that any hope of the German allies holding onto the Caucasus oil fields without direct German military support was a strategic and economic impossibility. The operational redirection of Ewald von Kleist's First Panzer Army to form a massive, dedicated relief force under the command of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's newly established Army Group Don represents the primary tactical engine of this counterfactual scenario. Historically, Operation Winter Storm, launched on December 12, 1942, was a desperate, under-resourced gamble, utilizing only the LVII Panzer Corps, which initially possessed only the 6th Panzer Division and the depleted 23rd Panzer Division, to break through a heavily fortified Soviet sector. If the OKH had authorized an immediate Caucasus evacuation on November 24, this relief force would have been dramatically reinforced by the arrival of the 3rd Panzer Division, the 13th Panzer Division, and the elite 5th SS Panzer Division Wikingâ, bringing over 250 additional veteran tanks and a massive contingent of battle-hardened motorized infantry. The assembly of such a formidable armored fist at Kotelnikovo would have fundamentally altered the balance of forces along the southern sector of the Stalingrad front. When Manstein launched the offensive, the sheer weight of 5 fully equipped panzer divisions, operating in close coordination, would have easily overwhelmed the initial Soviet defensive lines of the 51st Army. The elite tank crews of the Wikingâ and Third Panzer divisions, utilizing advanced tactical maneuvers and superior coordination, would have sliced through the Soviet blocking positions, brushing aside the local infantry divisions and driving rapidly toward the Myshkova River. The Soviet command, under General Alexander Vasilevsky, would have been forced to react with desperation, scrambling to redirect their strategic reserves, including the powerful Second Guards Army, to plug a massive, rapidly expanding breach in their southern defensive perimeter that threatened to unravel the entire outer ring of Operation Uranus. In this altered timeline, the tactical momentum generated by the combined armored force of 5 panzer divisions would have almost certainly allowed the relief column to reach the outer defenses of the Stalingrad pocket, crossing the Myshkova River and advancing to within 10 to 15 miles of the 6th Army's southern perimeter. The visual sight of German panzers on the horizon and the distant rumble of their guns would have ignited a wave of desperate hope among the starving, freezing soldiers of the Sixth Army, who had been told by Hitler to hold their positions at all costs and rely on the promised Luftwaffe airlift. However, the physical arrival of the relief force would have immediately collided with the stark, tragic realities of the Sixth Army's internal condition. Historically, General Friedrich Paulus and his Chief of Staff, Arthur Schmidt, had repeatedly emphasized that the Sixth Army was logistically incapable of executing a massive, coordinated breakout, codenamed Operation Thunderclap, because their transport vehicles were completely immobilized due to a total lack of fuel and horse-drawn transport had been largely slaughtered for food. To break out and link up with Manstein's relief column, the Sixth Army would have had to abandon all of its heavy artillery, its hundreds of remaining tanks, its massive stockpiles of inoperable machinery, and, most tragically, over 20,000 wounded and sick soldiers who could not be transported in the freezing cold. Paulus, operating under strict, non-negotiable orders from Adolf Hitler to hold the Volga line and maintain the fortress Stalingrad, would have faced an agonizing, career-defining decision to disobey the Führer and order a desperate, winter breakout on foot across the frozen steppe, or to remain in the pocket and hope that Manstein's relief force could somehow open a permanent, secure supply corridor into the city. The final strategic assessment of this Grand Caucasus redirection reveals that even a successful tactical link-up at Stalingrad would have likely resulted in a profound, late-war catastrophe for the German Wehrmacht rather than a restoration of the southern front. If the Sixth Army had attempted a breakout, the resulting retreat across the open, snow-covered steppes would have rapidly disintegrated into a scene of apocalyptic horror, as tens of thousands of weakened, freezing soldiers, marching without heavy weapons, were harassed relentlessly by Soviet cavalry, ski troops, and rocket artillery, resulting in a survival rate that would have been catastrophically low. Furthermore, the massive concentration of German armored forces at Stalingrad would have left the entire western flank of the southern front completely undefended. Historically, on December 16, 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Little Saturn, a massive offensive that crushed the Italian Eighth Army on the Don River and threatened to sweep south to capture Rostov, which would have permanently trapped Manstein's relief force, the First Panzer Army, and the remains of the Sixth Army in a colossal superpocket. If Army Group A had evacuated the Caucasus to save Stalingrad, they would have merely accelerated this strategic collapse. The Soviet Transcaucasus front would have surged forward unimpeded, capturing Rostov and the entire Sea of Azov coastline, trapping all German forces east of the Dnieper River. Ultimately, the counterfactual of immediate Caucasus evacuation and a reinforced relief attempt highlights the inescapable material and logistical bankruptcy of Case Blue. By attempting to conquer both the Volga and the Caucasus simultaneously, the German High Command had overextended its military-industrial resources beyond the point of no return, ensuring that no amount of late-war tactical brilliance or local armored reinforcements could alter the inevitable, crushing defeat of the Third Reich on the Eastern Front.